The McGee Quad Cam is probably the single most controversial engine in Top Fuel history. Two Australian brothers designed it, built it from scratch, brought it to America to take on the Chrysler Hemi, the most dominant engine in drag racing, and for their trouble, it was legislated out of existence. That's the version of this story you'll hear most often. Now, it's not wrong, but it leaves out the part that actually matters. The more I dug into this, the more I came to believe the McGee Quad Cam story isn't really about a ban at all. It's about money, it's about fear, and it's about what happens when a racing community encounters something genuinely new and decides it'd rather not find out how good it could be. If you grew up around Australian motorsport, the McGee name was just part of the furniture. Camshafts, fuel injection, speedway, sprint cars, midgets. You didn't necessarily know the full story, but you knew the name meant something. I only pieced the Quad Cam chapter together properly much later, and once I did, I was fascinated by it. Two Aussie blokes taking a clean sheet Nitro engine to America to challenge the Hemi and being told to go home. That's a story worth telling. So let me tell this properly, and the beginning isn't a drag strip, it's a workshop in King's Cross, Sydney. In 1946, a young auto electrician named Hedley McGee founded McGee Racing Cams. He designed and scratch-built his own camshaft grinding machine because he couldn't find one that did what he needed. That tells you everything about how the McGee family operates. Hedley's shop became the centre of Australian speedway and sprint car racing for decades. His son Chris was crew chief when George Tatnall won the Australian National Midget Championship in 1973. McGee camshafts went into the Westlake Speedway motorcycle engines that Peter Collins used to win a world championship in 1976. Hedley was inducted into the Australian Speedway Hall of Fame in 2007. This wasn't some backyard operation, this was the real thing. But the McGees weren't content to dominate one country. When visiting race teams from the US and Europe came to Australia, they'd discover McGee camshafts and fuel injection, take the gear home and start winning with it. That's how McGee products ended up at Indianapolis and in World Championship teams in Europe, not through advertising, but through results. Hedley's sons, Phil and Chris, grew up in the workshop and joined the business. In 1973, they were invited to bring an Australian racing tour to the United States. That trip changed everything. They saw the opportunities, made the plans, and established a McGee Cams facility in Southern California. They emigrated, two Australian brothers moving to the United States to compete at the top level of American motorsport. And the project they'd already started working on was the reason they came. A few years earlier, Phil and Chris had become obsessed with what they considered the most awesome race cars in the world, Top Fuel dragsters. And they'd identified something that much of the drag racing world either couldn't see or didn't want to see. The Chrysler Hemi, the engine that had dominated Top Fuel since the late 1960s, was fundamentally old technology. A pushrod motor, 2 valves per cylinder. In virtually every other form of serious motorsport on the planet, overhead cams and multi-valve cylinder heads had become the standard years earlier. The McGees looked at the Hemi and saw an engine that was winning because nobody was building a proper alternative. In 1974, Phil and Chris met with race officials in both Australia and the United States. They received a commitment, they shook hands, and they began building the first generation of the McGee Quad Cam. It was a 511 cubic inch all aluminium V8, 4 overhead camshafts, 4 valves per cylinder, 32 valves total, designed from the ground up for nitromethane. The McGee's oval track heritage convinced them a purpose-built drag racing engine would have a real performance advantage over a motor that started life as a passenger car design. They were right about the engineering. They produced more horsepower and greater reliability than anything else available at the time. And at the 1975 NHRA finals at Ontario, the engine earned Best Engineered honours. And that's not a fan opinion, that's NHRA itself recognising the quality of what the McGees had built. Remember that, because it matters later. The first generation engine was powerful, but it had a problem. The block and head casting on each bank was one piece. Strong as anything, but a nightmare to service between rounds. Phil and Chris knew this would kill them in competition, so in 1986, they redesigned the engine from scratch. New molds, one-piece block with sleeves, billet aluminium cylinder heads, magnesium cam housings, everything assembled on dowel pins with O-ring seals. The only gaskets in the entire motor were the head gaskets and the pan gasket. And here's the detail that matters most. The engine was designed to accept all the popular racing hardware, sharing the same bolt patterns as the existing Hemi-based components. It cost within a couple $100 of a Keith Black late model Hemi and used many of the same internal parts. The Quad Cam first appeared in NHRA competition around 1983, shaking down in RJ Trotter's top fueler at Orange County International Raceway, with runs of 625 and 677 over the quarter. Sue Ransom, one of only 4 women to have competed in NHRA Top Fuel at that time, made 5 national event starts with the team and qualified once at the 1986 Fall Nationals in Phoenix, where they broke against future world champion Gary Ormsby in round 1. Fellow Australian David Grubnick joined the McGee Cams team, earning Top Speed of the Year honours at El Mirage in 1993 behind the wheel of an old Top Fuel car. But the driver who made the engine genuinely competitive was Gary Beck, 2-time NHRA Top Fuel champion, first man into the 560s in 1975, first into the 550s in 1981, the 540s in 1982, the 530s in 1983. Beck took on the McGee program in the late 1980s, and he brought something the engine desperately needed, a world-class mechanical brain to match world-class driving talent. And one fan summed it up well, calling Beck the guy who made the McGee Quad Cam engine competitive when it looked like it was always going to be an uncompetitive leaker. And the results came. Beck won the Governor's Cup at Sacramento in 1989. The track records he set still stand. That same year, the McGee car set track records at Famoso Raceway and LACR. In 1991, a McGee engine set the European Top Fuel speed record. The team was in the conversation for the first 300-mile-an-hour run. Chris McGee was also crew chief for Flash Gordon Minio's Nitro funny car, which finished runner-up at the 1992 Houston Super Nationals, and Lowe qualified at Sonoma in both 92 and 93, setting a new track record in the process. In 1995, David Grubnick climbed as high as number 2 in IHRA Top Fuel points, driving the McGee Quad Cam dragster.
There is David Grubnick from Acton, California, a marketing executive in the entertainment industry, originally from Brisbane, Australia. He singled in the first round, so we're not quite sure what he can do. But he's going to have to call on everything he's got right now, because he's going up against Rhonda Hartman. Hartman, who won Rookie of the Year last year and picked up 2 victories in doing it, is really on a roll, running consistent 530s. Meanwhile, the car in the other lane, driven by Grubnick, is owned by Chris McGee, who invented the McGee engine. He's still trying to get the bugs out of it. It uses overhead cams to eliminate push rods. If it's not working to its optimum right now, it'll be Hartman.
Meanwhile, in England, Brian Johnson's McGee-powered Top Fuel motorcycle was setting world ET records multiple times through the 1990s, approaching 5 seconds at close to 240 miles an hour. The 4-valve combustion chamber design was producing massive horsepower, even with a lower nitro percentage than the cars ran. The engine concept worked across platforms. The Quad Cam gained enough attention that Dale Armstrong bought one. Armstrong, who tuned Kenny Bernstein to the first 300-mile-an-hour pass at the 1992 Gator Nationals. Bernstein called it one of the bigger failures. But Armstrong didn't test engines on a whim. The fact that he pursued the Quad Cam tells you there was a real case for it being the future. And that's precisely what scared everyone else. At a national event at Columbus, fuel car racers circulated a petition calling for the McGee engine to be ruled illegal. The claims were predictable: too expensive, too hard to service, unfair advantage. The McGee team held a show and tell for NHRA representatives and walked through every claim. The cost? Within a couple of $100s of a Keith Black Hemi. The serviceability? Same internal components, same bolt patterns. The too hard to work on claim? Coming from people who'd never even opened one up. Every fuel car racer at Columbus signed that petition, except two, Kenny Bernstein and Jim Head. The only two who'd actually bothered to examine the engine. Everyone else signed out of fear. And here's what makes this whole thing sting. NHRA's own stated reason for allowing the McGee engine in competition was that the overhead cam design eliminated the major cause of catastrophic valve train failures that were plaguing Hemi engines at the time. Their own ruling said the engine was safer. They acknowledged it solved the problem that the Hemi couldn't, and then they banned it anyway. The petition died. The McGees had been grandfathered into NHRA competition after running at national events for years, and banning the engine outright would have carried legal exposure. But the message was clear. Nobody was going to sponsor this program. Nobody was going to risk their money backing an engine the entire paddock wanted gone. And then, according to Henry Walther, who was part of the McGee crew and wrote what I consider to be the most important account of this story that exists, the McGees simply ran out of money. Not banned, not beaten, broke. Top Fuel eats cash, and without a major sponsor willing to back a war against the Hemi establishment, the funding disappeared. Phil and Chris just stopped showing up. When the McGees were gone, NHRA quietly removed their engine from the rulebook. No press release, no announcement, just a rule change in the next printing. All Top Fuel teams were mandated to race one engine configuration, limited to 2 valves per cylinder. And with it went every other alternative engine project. The Sainty, the Benjamin, Joe Schubeck's Eagle, all gone. So where are the McGees today? Phil and his son Briar run McGee Racing Cams out of the Midwest. Fuel injection systems, sprint cars, dragsters. Chris runs McGee Cams, an injection from Canyon Country, California, building junior dragster engines that have won 15 national championships. I tend to think the Hemi monopoly has hurt Top Fuel more than it's helped it. That's my opinion, and I know plenty of people disagree. But when you look at what the McGees were trying to do and what stopped them, it wasn't engineering, it wasn't competition, it was politics. An engine that NHRA itself said was safer than the Hemi. Banned not because it failed, but because it threatened to succeed. I'm Dan from Nitro Mouth, and I want to know where you land on this one. Was the Hemi monopoly the right call, or did NHRA kill something that could have taken Top Fuel genuinely somewhere new? Drop it in the comments, like and subscribe if this is your kind of story, and I'll see you in the next one.